Welcome. Welcome to this 1-hour webinar. We are pleased by your interest in today's topics, preparing for a change of era, engage difference, deepening understanding for intercultural ministry. Jonathan Schmidt is the main speaker of today's webinar. But before I turn over to Jonathan, I would like to give a few comments. First, I would like to thank you for giving us permission to record this webinar. Second, those who have joined through computer or tablets, I have muted your microphone when you join the webinar. When we break into small groups or when you want to speak, please unmute yourself. And when you're done speaking, please remember to mute your microphone. If not, I will need to mute your microphone. When the facilitator asks you questions or comments, feel free to write them down in the chat box that you can see on the right of your screen. And lastly, if you have any technical issue, please send me a private message through the chat box. Now, to briefly introduce Jonathan, he is the Canadian Council of Churches Associate Secretary, Intercultural Leadership and Learning, Justice and Peace. A gifted facilitator and designer of experiential adult learning, he sees being involved in the life and community of the Engage Difference program the most profound experience and greatest privileges of his career in ministry. Welcome, Jonathan.
Good to see so many familiar faces and a few new faces. A lot of content to go over today, so I'm going to jump right in. In 2012, the need for a new ecumenical program was identified. There was a need to resource churches in Canada for diversity, and specifically the diversity that was increasingly part of life within the churches, but also in the wider society. And at the same time, in 2012, a number of denominations in Canada had made some commitments around diversity, around racial justice, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and around becoming intercultural churches. So what emerged at that time was a program called Deepening Understanding for Intercultural Ministry, which is now more commonly called Engage Difference. And in the years since that, it's been offered multiple times with over 200 alumni of the program. Each time it's offered, it's shaped by the local context. It's been offered in Vancouver, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, the Sandy Soto Spiritual Center in Beausejour, Manitoba, Toronto, Barrie, Ontario, and Montreal. This webinar is going to be an interview, or rather an overview of what we've learned as a community through the program as it's evolved and as it's been offered. Those of you who are gathered today, some of you are very familiar with the program. Many of you are alumni that were participants in the program. And for other people, this is an introduction to the Engage Difference program. So we'll spend some time briefly introducing the vision of Just Intercultural community that's emerged as we've offered the program. And we'll also give a very quick overview of the activities of the program and the approach and process. Most of the program most of this webinar rather, will focus on what we've learned through some research and focused research with alumni facilitators and stakeholders in the program. So we'll begin with a very brief talking about the context in which we find ourselves in, the vision of Intercultural, which has emerged. And after that, I'm going to have you break very briefly into some small groups for an initial introducing yourselves to each other and engaging a first question. Then we'll spend some time describing the program. And then the largest amount of time will be letting you know what we found out in our research and moving in towards some next steps. And we want you to help with some of those next steps. So we're going to break into a larger time of small group conversation at that point, and you'll be in the same small groups. And then we'll finish with some closing remarks. So in the context, and I love this, Pope Francis has said, we are not living an era of change, but a change of era. And that change of era is both global and it's a change of era for the church. Others have talked about this change in the church in other ways. Bosch talks about an emerging ecumenical paradigm. Lonergan noted it, that now we can be, that we can perceive that there are many unique Christianities, or as many expressions of Christianity as there are contexts and cultures. Ronner talks about the third great epoch in Christian history. Buhlmann describes the coming of the third church, or the emergence of churches in the new nations of the post-colonial world, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And Sana describes Christianity emerging for the first time as a world religion. And he argues that Western European cultural ways of thinking no longer confine the church. In the moment that we're living in, it's clear that this change into a new era is not smooth and linear, but rather a lurching. Lurching fits and starts, and that it's unpredictable. What's even unpredictable is what the new era will be and how Christianity will respond. Over my career, I've seen many different responses as the church has recognized it's in this change of era. For many years, there's many attempts to come up with the model that will be the new church. And I've seen many over the years. Some of them work wonderfully in certain settings, and those same models fall flat and don't work in other contexts or settings. Many in the church have tried to predict the future of our culture. And instead, what we've decided and what's emerged for us is the need to take a new approach, a different approach. And rather what is needed is not set models for the church, but rather that the church be equipped to discern the context that they're in and how to be faithful in whatever this new context will be. Or more appropriately, what the new contexts will be. So to sum up, what we have come to as we've offered this program is that Canadian Christianity is moving into a new era, one that requires new tools for different ways of being Christian. The Engage Difference program provides participants in their communities tools to understand their own culture and to discern what just intercultural community looks like within their own context. Instead of prescribing those new tools, Engage Difference provides a creative space for imagination. The role of imagination is to seek and create spaces beyond the places that exist, not confined by what is or what is known. Imagination is the art of creating what does not exist. So initially we thought that what we were going to have to provide in this program was a program for mainly the white dominant culture in Canada, the people that make up many of our churches, and that our work would be working with them to help them understand that they had a culture and that that culture shaped the relationship. The core themes of the very first offering was defining culture and how it works, defining what dominant culture is, talking about power and privilege, racial justice, and white privilege. But a couple of very important and unexpected things happened. The groups that we were working with were much more diverse than we expected. The ethno-diversity in the room very quickly became very broad, including Canadian Indigenous peoples. And we also quickly realized that the diversity was broader in many other ways that we didn't expect or think of. There was an intersectionality of diversity in the room: gender, race, gender identity, age, ableness, class, denomination, geography, education, so on and so on. So that diversity really shaped our understanding of community as we began to offer the program, and shaped what we've started to discern. We were called discern what we were called to as a people of faith. So initially we thought what we were offering was skills and tools, head knowledge, how to do intercultural ministry. And we offered it with some principles of adult education that allowed people to experience and practice those tools. But instead, we very quickly realized that the 5 days were primarily an experience of just intercultural community, a gathering of people negotiating and working together to try to understand and come to a vision of what that would be. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the vision of just intercultural community that emerged. We probably will have a future webinar that focuses just on this. So this is very much an overview. In the program, we talk about the different definitions of relationship across culture, multiculturalism, particularly as it's expressed in Canada, cross-cultural and what's meant by that, intercultural. And we've begun to start using a working definition of what we call just intercultural ministry and just intercultural community. So as a community in the program, we work together towards God's vision of just intercultural community, which we've defined as being community in which all are able to be fully themselves as created by God. All are able to be shaped by each other and shape the other while still maintaining their identity. And all are able to shape and be shaped by the community. We recognize for this to happen as just intercultural community, there needs to be just or right relationship. That people need to stand together with equal power and privilege and equal ability to shape and be shaped. Just intercultural ministry and community includes right relationship with God, with each other, and with all of creation. And we recognize that we have glimpses of this vision and that our understanding changes as we explore and experience it together. And we also recognize that just intercultural community and ministry looks different in every context across Canada, around the world. There's not a formula for how to be intercultural. There's not a formula for just intercultural community. The work that we're doing, and I like the words of Eduardo Galeano, is that we are fighting for a world that must be the house of everyone. So in a moment, we're going to have you into some breakout rooms to get a chance to introduce yourselves to each other. These webinars are not just about giving you information. They're also part of our process of building community of those people who are doing the work of intercultural ministry. So what we're going to have you do is this is going to be a short initial breakout room. You're going to have only 5 minutes. We want everyone who's in your room to have a chance to say their name and to say where they're joining from. We have people from around the world on this today, as well as across Canada. So where in Canada or the world are you calling in from? And maybe say very briefly describe your community. And then if there's time after everyone has a chance to introduce themselves, spend some time with this question. Where have you seen glimpses of just intercultural community? So where have you seen glimpses of being able to be fully yourself? And where have there been glimpses of being in spaces where those that you are with are able to be fully themselves? So what I'm going to do is give you a little overview of a very brief overview of the 5 days of the program. And as I go through it, be showing some pictures as well to give you a sense of the energy that's in the room and the kinds of activities that are part of this program. So the program is typically residential and it's offered in different places across Canada. The first day of the program, the preparation for the program is as important as some of the activities that day. There's a host community a local host community that offers hospitality, but they also are part of shaping the program and particular activities that relate to the needs of that context. So that first day is a setting of a space that's hospitable, where people will feel comfortable. There's opening worship and a worship that names who's in the room and the communities that they bring. There's some agreements for how we're going to learn together and care for each other as a learning community. And there's a great deal of storytelling that first day as people bring into the room who they are and their journeys. The afternoon of that first day is we spend some initial work on trying to define what we mean by culture, some theories of how culture works and shapes us. And that's done with a particular lens of what our faith says about community and how we're to be in community. And that day we begin to work on defining what we mean by just intercultural community. So for those of you who don't have video, the pictures that are up front are some pictures of the couple of the spaces in preparation for people gathering and opening worship, some conversations at tables that happen as we negotiate how we learn together. And there's an activity where people are up and moving around and wrestling with how culture works. Second day of the program, this is where we really discover the power and importance of not offering this as a short workshop, but rather a 5-day program. People in a short workshop can be a little bit uncomfortable, but sit with that for 2 hours and leave. When you're together with a community for 5 days, as uncomfortable as you might be, you're with them again the next day. And the 5 days are a process of together naming that discomfort and naming how we work together with the differences that are in the room. That second day is sometimes the most difficult day. It's a day when we wrestle with how power and privilege work in our cultures and in our society. We talk about how power shapes relationship. Participants explore their understandings and experiences of power. We focus on racism as one of the ways that power, privilege, marginalization, and resistance and solidarity are experienced. And for those of you who don't have video, we've got a couple of pictures up here. One of the ways that we explore power is by modeling it. And so you'll see some plastic glasses on tables where people are making models of how they experience power. There's an activity in the top right, wrestling with the history of the historical roots of our relationships across culture. Some of the definitions that we use. People on the top left are looking at there's a color line where we explore racism in our cultures. So that afternoon, there's a real focus on some of the history and the theologies and the stories that we inherit from our faith that help us to understand how we are to live in relationship in community. That afternoon, there's often also, no, let's move on to the next day. So the next day is a chance to really wrestle with some of the concepts of the first 2 days. And typically what happens is people are broken into denominational groups, and using the models and tools of the first days, they describe the culture of their denomination. And then they spend some time looking at their own ministry context and also describing it and the culture and cultures and the reasons for the culture of that, of their community in which they live or are in ministry. In the afternoon, often the focus is on looking at how theology and culture interact and shape each other. And we often have a local person that engages the group in those kinds of conversations. It's an opportunity for people to think about what the theologies are that are operative in their own context. So for those of you who don't have video, there's several pictures of people describing their denominations or modeling it, or using some ways of modeling the culture of their local context. On the bottom three smaller pictures are all pictures of work that a guest did or guests have done in terms of exploring culture and theology. The middle picture is a picture of looking at different images of Jesus from different cultures. There's a second one where the person used flour to help us understand culture and theology. You'll have to come to a program to find out what that's all about. And then another one of our guests talking about culture and theology from an Asian perspective. On the fourth day, the activities focus on practicing and practical skills. We often have guests, people who will come and talk about engaging conflict, or talking about music or worship, pastoral care across cultures. And then in the afternoon, we have time where people are given an opportunity to think about how they're going to bring this learning into their home context. And small groups of people work on projects, putting together a workshop or a program that they will use in their home context. Again, for those of you without video, we've got on the far left a guest that helped us with music and culture. We've got a couple of pictures in the middle of people doing some work together on their own projects. And then on the far right, two of the resource people who are sometimes at our programs. So then the final day in the morning, there's a chance to practice those workshops and then get feedback from each other and learn from each other. And then the afternoon of the program is an opportunity to think about what it would mean to take this home, to take this home as individuals, to make this sustainable work. And so there's some talk about how, as a community, they can support each other, self-care. And then there's a closing worship where we send each other back to our home contexts. And then the program doesn't end there. There's some very intentional ways in which the people that are in this program stay connected with each other, and then people who are in other offerings of the program become part of this larger network that support each other. So those of you who don't have video, what we've got is a few pictures of some people's presentations, some workshops that people tried out with each other, and some pictures from our closing worship. There's much more to the program. One of the things is the program is brings together a number of other components. There's daily worship. There's informal time. The program is residential, so there's much time where people spend time with each other. There's multiple learning styles. There's all kinds of moments where we use storytelling and new ways of listening to each other. There's often different cultural experiences that are part of the program. At Sandy Soto Center, there's often a teaching sweat with an elder, or there might be in other places a dinner out or a visit to that's in a cultural engagement. In Toronto, we've got Bernardo Ramirez comes in and teaches us how to salsa. So for those of you who don't have video, we've got some pictures of people dancing salsa. We've got some meals out. We've got a picture of a sweat, and we've got pictures of some different cultural sites. And I've got another set of pictures up. We use storytelling and different ways of storytelling and using art and creative ways to tell stories. So on the bottom left, one group, a person brought a loom in, and we wove our stories into a long tapestry. At the bottom, there's a picture of another person brought in tools for making masks. And that was a way in which people were able to tell their own stories. The top pictures are some of the informal times where people learn from each other through informal conversation and simply being together in community. And then the bottom right is a picture from one of our closing worships. So now I'd like to jump into the research and what we learned, and then we'll have an opportunity for you all to break into small groups again. And in your small groups, you're going to be having a little bit of conversation. This 5-day program is what has evolved here in terms of one way of engaging transformative learning and trying to explore just intercultural community. But in your small groups, we're going to have you spend a little bit more time talking about sharing other places where and other ways that you've found to do this work. So there was an invitation to 200 alumni of the program and resource people and facilitators and representatives of stakeholder organizations. And in all, when we put together focus groups, there were over 50 participants. And during their time together, they were asked to answer a number of questions, to have conversation together. The first was to share with each other times during the program when they saw glimpses of just intercultural community happening or movement toward it. And then to talk about times in their home communities, whether they had moments where they had glimpses of just intercultural community because of their involvement in the program. And then finally, we had them do some thinking about what might be or what is God calling us to next, to have them help us shape the future of this program and other work that we do at the Forum for Intercultural Leadership and Learning. We asked them what their hopes or vision for the future of the Engage Difference program might be. And the process with the groups was that they had conversations and then they together identified themes that they heard in each other's stories. And they agreed on hopes that they wanted to have carried forward in the research. There were some overarching themes that we heard in the 7 focus groups. The first and strongest one is that the program has brought about change in the participants and their communities. And it was important to note that the change goes beyond head knowledge. One of the participants described it as, it's about that thing that happens within us. Rather than the knowledge that comes into our heads, it is the inclination of our hearts. The other change is that they recognize being able to recognize the complexity and intersectionality of issues of diversity. They had a heightened consciousness of the issues and dynamics of relationship across culture. They talked about having a self-hermeneutic of suspicion. They described themselves as being less presumptive and more humble, and being more intentional and better able to stay with others and to be with others that they may not have felt comfortable with or stayed in listening to before. They learned how to listen to others who are different. They're more trusting of the other and more trusting of the processes that are needed to be together with someone who is different. And they talked about feeling more comfortable with feeling discomfort. The second strong theme that came out was one of hope and encouragement. And we particularly heard this from people who would describe themselves as being marginalized in our greater society, but also marginalized in the church. They described the program as providing hope and courage in their own community's struggle towards a more just world. Related to this, the word voice came out over and over again in the research. Participants felt that their voices were heard in ways that were different from their usual experiences. They felt confidence in speaking and being heard, and in listening in new ways. One of the strongest things that came out was that the program was a profound experience of community. People experienced just intercultural community in the program itself. And they had a profound experience of being together with other people that wanted to work towards just intercultural community. And the participation in the program was described by many as a profound experience of faith and spirituality. It was an individual faith experience, but also a collective glimpse of what communities of faith might be. There was also noting that there was important skills and tools, and that they learned skills and tools, and more importantly, were able to experience and practice them. But what's most notable is that strongly what comes out is that those tools and skills for intercultural ministry were not the most important outcome for the participants. They focus more on the change, hope, and encouragement and community. And in fact, what comes out of this research is that the content of this program is not those skills for intercultural community, but the experience of intercultural community that's part of the program. So the content is the experience of community and being together with a group of people working towards just intercultural community, and the space that this program provides for that. So there were 7 participant groups, and it in itself was an act of recognizing there are local theologies and local contexts. So the mix of people in each of the different groups brought about very different conversation. One group focused on intersectionality. They really noticed that this was an experience of experiencing and honoring diversity and being intentional about trust and vulnerability across differences. Another group talked about possibility, and there was a Spanish speaker in the group who used the word puede. This group named that the program and being with the groups of participants were a glimpse of just intercultural community, or a glimpse of what is possible for us as faith communities. Another group talked about language, and what happened in this group is there were quite a few people who had been in a Vancouver program, where a significant number of people for whom English wasn't a first language and they struggled in English. And a large number of people in this focus group were also part of a bilingual program in Montreal. And they recognized that the negotiating of language was an act of just intercultural community. How do you make people fully themselves when they don't have a common language and when there's a language that's dominant? How do you make sure that every person can be fully present and fully part of the community? Another group focused on creativity. They really recognized that intercultural ministry is not a set formula, but it's an act of creativity. And another group did talk about the tools and skills, but particularly the language, learnings, and understandings and chances, opportunities to practice them within the program. Another group talked about the program as simply being joyful, that there were glimpses of just intercultural community, and that it was a joyful, if sometimes difficult and struggle to be together, but a really good experience of community. And the final group was one that was made up mostly of stakeholders from denominations and other institutions. And they observed change in people who had participated in the program and change in their communities. And they saw the potential of the program to move their church institutions, their denominations, and theological colleges and other institutions toward just intercultural community. Okay, so the participants had some hopes for the future of the program. The first is that there'd be greater participation, more people and more diversity, even though this is one of the most diverse places they'd experienced. They wanted to see even more diversity in the program. They wanted to be financially sustainable, and they wanted to be accessible, financially accessible, that the cost of the program not block the diversity that they hope for. They really hope for that it be more of an integrated part of leadership training in our church, in our seminaries, in our lay leadership training, and in other places. They also talked about a hope that the work be unsiloed. Intercultural ministry in many of our denominations gets set off as a separate piece of ministry. And they rather saw a hope that it crosses every part of life, of every part of the life of the church. They hope for a wider adoption of the vision of Just Intercultural community, including in local communities. And they also hope for more work in building that community of alumni, people who support each other, people who learn from each other as they struggle with doing intercultural community in the Canadian church. And finally, they talked about wanting to break down resistance to coming and being part of the program, which can be a sometimes uncomfortable experience. It's a little bit of a leap of courage to be part of the 5 days. But they also talked about wanting to break down the resistance of the church. That often when the church talks about relationship across difference and diversity, they really are, the church has fully adopted multiculturalism, but hasn't gotten to where it's fully adopting just intercultural ministry. So we might have a multicultural church, but they saw that there's a need to break down resistance to becoming a just intercultural church. The final step of the research was to bring some of these findings to there's a reference group that oversees this work, and they made some commitments moving forward. They see that there's a need for Phil, not just to provide this kind of program, but also to offer itself as a place where others who are doing this work can meet with each other and learn from each other. They also saw that there's an importance for the Forum for Intercultural Leadership and Learning being a community, a place where people experience just intercultural community. There's a need for more collaboration with institutions of ministry, leadership training. They strongly said we need to continue offering the program in locations across Canada. Another thing that came through is that recognizing that we have developed a very unique pedagogy or way of learning, a pedagogy for transformation that needs to be shared across the church. And the final couple of things that they've committed to is working towards conversations towards common understandings of what we mean by just intercultural community. And then finally, moving away from providing diversity skills or intercultural training, but seen as a place where intercultural communities explored and discovered. Good. Now I'm going to break you into breakout rooms one more time. And in those, one of the things that we're dealing with here is the current reality of COVID, and bringing people together for 5 days is not easy and not even possible. And there are a lot of people who are offering webinars and video conferences, and you've all joined today, but I'm kind of feeling webinared and video conferenced out. I find they're very good for sharing information, but I haven't found too many of those spaces that I would say are transformational, that have changed me. So the question that's hard at the end of a webinar is, so what? What do you do with the information that we've gathered, and how do we do community? So we'd like your help in thinking about, in this time of COVID and beyond, how do we bring about this kind of learning, this experience of community without being able to be face-to-face? So what we want you to do in your small groups is just have a conversation. In today's context, have you discovered tools? Have you had experiences of encounters, of things that other people are doing or that you're doing that actually supports your community in just intercultural community, in building community, in becoming, allowing spaces where everyone can be themselves? And we're going to have a very brief report back. We're going to be running up near the end of the time that we've committed to. But we'll have in a sort of the chat room and a few people share very briefly, maybe from that conversation, a moment of transformative learning or a skill or a tool that was used. Maybe a moment where they saw space created where everyone is able to fully shape each other and be shaped by each other. And a way that sort of setting of just intercultural community where there's equal power and privilege is brought about. So again, what are some of the tools? What are the ways that transformational learning is happening today when we're not able to be face to face. And then being able to share back to the larger group very briefly.
Welcome back. Just to let you know, we'll run over a little bit, a few minutes, like 5 minutes, but we feel like it is very important to hear what people have to share. You could report back to the larger groups through using the chat box that you see on your right, or you could raise hand and maybe have 2 to 3 people reporting back. But feel free to use the chat box as well. Is there anyone who would like to report back from your group?
Thomas here. I could quickly give a couple of tools that emerged from our group. One would be we found sharing engagement in a project was very helpful. And you can come back to reflect on that on Zoom. We would like a kit of tools that we could use in our congregations. In this one group has parish has an intercultural Sunday once per year where they invite musicians or speakers. The power of the sharing circle, using that in a congregation or in a part of a congregation. There's been a sharing circle in Brandon that's met regularly for a long time, a couple of years, I think now. And I suggested going to another culture's ceremonies, etc., where we become vulnerable and just sit and learn and experience.
Thank you, Thomas. Also in the chat box, I see some people reporting back. I see Kathy saying that we thought that concrete experiences, teaching dance like salsa on screen could work, music shared, cooking online, making kimchi will work, mask making will work too. Yeah. We also have Peter say we had a theme of regular weekly meeting on the same group of people as friends or in Bible study or relationships. Those became intimate and very meaningful, even transformative. I encourage you to keep on writing on this chat box. And even after we're done with our webinar, we're happy to send all these comments to you through email. I'll read one more, and maybe Jonathan, you could then lead. We have from Bill Miller, who said the common theme was around immediate context response to actual things that are happening, using experiences of direct trauma or new responses to trauma from COVID. It's about using what is immediate as the tool.
Yeah, so maybe keep typing in the chat box and sharing some of reporting back from the groups. What Pablo will do is after the webinar is send to everyone who is registered what you wrote in the chat box and what you reported back. So just some very much closing remarks. Thank you so much. It's again, as I said, I recognize a lot of you. Those whose faces I don't recognize, there's a lot of other names that I recognize, and it is fantastic to bring you together. This is an act of moving toward the kind of community that we're talking about. If people are interested in the program as we move ahead, when COVID is past, we will. Our hope is to bring together people in these intensive 5-day programs again. But in the meantime, we're working on developing other ways that we can connect, including events like this kind of webinar. If you want to know more about the programming that we offer, whether it's this 5-day program or it's other ways to engage, our webpage is one of the best spaces, interculturalleadership.ca. And if you explore around there, you can see in the news and in the programs and resources section a number of things that are helpful. Also on that page are recordings of past webinars. And while I'm on it, if the way these webinars are working is we have different people who are the resource to it. And so if you have an idea of a way that you would like to engage people in a webinar, drop us a line, email us. The other way you can stay connected is through our e-newsletter. When you registered, there was a checkbox where you could say you wanted to be added. If you didn't check that box, you can just email us and we'll add you to the about once every 2 months newsletter that we send out by email. And there's always Facebook, for better or for worse. And this is our Facebook, Intercultural Leadership and Learning. Good. Yeah, I'm going to hand it back over to Pablo.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for your wonderful presentation and for facilitating this wonderful webinar. And thank you all for participating. This is our 4th in a series of webinars being offered by the Forum for Intercultural Leadership and Learning. Just for a final few comments, I also, as Jonathan said, want to take this opportunity to say that we are able to offer these webinars for free and accessible to as many as possible through the support of individuals. We know these are difficult times for many of us. However, if you are able, please consider a donation. On how to make a donation, you'll soon receive a separate instruction email from me right after this webinar. We will have another webinar on the topic of beloved community and how to strive toward it on November 2020. For the exact date, we will let you know through our website and email. If you have a webinar topic that you want to offer to us, please let us know. And if you're interested to facilitate a webinar, please let us know. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great afternoon or evening or night wherever you are. Shalom.